Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Ampire Media, Ampire. Always much appreciated when you tune in. And don't forget, you can read my work on ESPN.com. So in a minute, I'm going to get to my five things I think, obviously talking about the Commanders, but a little bit, of course, about the Tennessee Titans, who, of course, is Sunday's opponent. And don't forget, I will be back after the game wrapping up the Commanders game against the Titans, and I will be doing the live stream show this coming Tuesday, 7:30. So got still have multiple shows for you next week, even though the Commanders will be on a bye. So let's get to the news. You probably already know some of this by now, but we'll go over it anyway. So already ruled out right tackle Andrew Wiley and running back Austin Eckler and cornerback Marshawn Lattimore is doubtful, which means there's a 75% chance he's not going to play. And it's rare when somebody's listed as doubtful and then actually plays on Sunday. Now, maybe that designation changes on Saturday, but I'm not sure what's going to happen on Saturday that would change that. When you deal with the hamstring, you got to make 100% sure before you put the guy out there. Now, I will say we did see him out there this week. Watched him on Friday going through all sorts of individual drills at full speed, cutting, etc. But clearly they're not comfortable with him going out there yet. The one thing I thought maybe might happen this weekend is that maybe they get him out there on a snap count because they could certainly use what he can add in the secondary. And there have been multiple times the last few weeks in these losses where you feel like, hey, if you had Lattimore out there, perhaps that play is different. Or the situation then becomes different and it allows you to play better. But he hasn't been out there. I think the fact that he was out there even working limited this week is a very good sign for after the bye. But man, they could use him for sure. And anyways, with Wiley out, like last week was replaced by Trent Scott. We'll see what happens there with Eckler out. They did re-sign Chris Rodriguez earlier this week, so he's back on the roster. He'll be up. And then you have for running back Brian Robinson was not listed on the injury report, so he is good to go. He was a full participant on Friday, so that's good news for Washington. Anyways, let's get to the five things I think. So number one, well, it's going to be about 40 to 42 degrees on Sunday. So I think the weather, the cold, I'm not worried about that for Jaden Daniels. So I know there's going to be a lot of talk about that because you do wonder. He's a guy who grew up in Southern California. He played in Louisiana, in New Orleans. So he's very used to the warm weather. Did have a game against Arkansas a couple years ago where it's like, I think it was like 35 degrees. He did not have a great game. There was a little bit of a wind. But was it because of the cold, or was it because he just wasn't playing consistent football at that point, or because the team wasn't good enough? It's hard to say. Like I watched some of that game, and you can't, he's wearing short sleeves. I mean, he didn't seem like it. I don't know that it was the cold weather. I can't answer that. Only he can. But he's not the only one out there playing. And what you saw, the other thing I know from that game is he got a lot better last year in the offseason going into last year. So he was a different quarterback than he was back then. So to think the game was just bad weather, well, you can't say that. And I don't know how much the players really view that as a reason. What I know about Daniels, he doesn't get bothered by much. I mean, this is the guy that they always talk about coming off the field. He's the same, whether it's a win, a loss, whether it's before the game, during the game, after the game, he's going to handle things the same way. I don't think he's going to let some cold weather really distract him from what he wants to do on the field. And I've talked to players about this, and as a quarterback, does it affect you? And usually what they'll say is it does not. Like they don't, if it's in your head, then you got some other issues as a player, right? Because you've got to play in cold weather at some point. Now you can warm your body up. There are guys and apparently who will take like scuba suits or something like that, those skin tight suits to go surfing in, cut it up and put it on, like, and then it keeps you warm. But also once you get playing, it's okay. Like the weather isn't as bad a factor because you get warmed up, you get into the game. Here's the other thing. It's not like it's going to be 10 degrees on Sunday. It's going to be 42 degrees. That's a forecast right now with the wind chill of like upper 30. So we're not talking frigid weather. The bigger issue would be the wind, because that's when you have to cut through things. You have to learn how to throw in the wind. More so than the cold. And even with the cold, I wonder, is the ball heavier or whatever? It's like talking to one quarterback said, no, actually it's what it is. It's probably drier. And so but it's not like it's a heavy ball that it's hard to, oh my gosh, it's 35 degrees. You got to throw this. The wind is the issue. And right now, the wind, you're just looking at the forecast, is like 5 to 7 miles with some gusts up around 10 to 15. So if it stays like that, it's just okay. So if he doesn't play well on Sunday, I don't think it's because of the cold. I think it's because his offense isn't where it needs to be. And it's not like they've been humming the last two games in particular. So, and they are playing a pretty good defense, but I don't view this as a big thing. This is a kid who's very mentally tough. You look at the situation he's gone through in his career, you look at the hits he takes, he gets back up, he's highly competitive. Guys like that don't get distracted or get bothered by the cold. It becomes a mental thing. And this is not a guy who gets bothered by those things. I do wonder, is this a game like this is a game where Tennessee does a really good stopping the run. So do you give Daniels a little bit more, put a little bit more on him in this game, whether it's as a runner, whether it's as a thrower, to help spark this offense? Because if you're going to rely on the run game and feeding on those in those situations, I think it's going to be really tough to get it going. So is this a game maybe you get a little bit more tempo? It's not so much about the no huddle because they've continued to run a lot of no huddle. Like the last three games, it was in the no huddle offense, he's 35 for 61. But tempo is a little bit different. Tempo to me is you get up. It's not just no huddle. You can go no huddle. You see college teams doing that all the time. You're getting the play and you're signal the line, whatever. But when you go tempo, you see them like once you start compiling first downs, which is when they go tempo, then you can get up to the line. Now you're going to go at a different pace. That's something we haven't seen enough of because they're just doing very poorly on third down. But in the wins, he completes 70.9% of his passes in no huddle, 5.7 yards per rush out of no huddle in the wins. When they lose games, 61.5% completion, 4.2 yards per carry. So whatever that means, now you know. But I do wonder if this is a game that you just say like, hey, put a little bit more on Daniels to get this offense going. And because I don't think they're too far off from getting back to where they need to be. And he's a guy that maybe you can trust a little bit more. And I'm going to get to more of that. What other areas that he could hurt Tennessee in a few minutes when I start talking about their defense. But number two, I think some offensive issues could be resolved just by making a couple plays. And it sounds simple. I know that, but there were plays available against Pittsburgh. Game looks a lot different if he completes, if Cosme holds a block on the quarterback draw, if he completes the pass to McCaffrey, if he completes the pass to Zacchaeus, if Ertz doesn't drop a pass. Like all those plays are plays that are not weren't too terribly difficult to make. Now, under duress, it can be or whatever. I get it. Like, or let me say this better. They're plays that we've seen them make, blocks that we've seen them make, catches we've seen them make. Those are, they've made a look routine early in the year. They missed on that game, but you make one or two of those, the game looks a lot different. And I know I've talked about that before, but it's true. Philadelphia felt there was a problem there. Last week, there were a couple plays where you say it wasn't quite the same as in Pittsburgh, but a couple plays that just showed that how a little bit of being a little bit off can affect you. Like the pass to Terry McLaurin down the left side. People talk a lot about his targets. Well, there's a big target for him in a one-on-one situation. And it was just, he had good leverage on that. He did a good job running the route. I think the defensive back played it flat-footed. He runs by him and he's down the side. The ball just drifts a little bit too much to the outside, takes him off that plane a little bit and just it leads him out. If you lead him, again, we're talking 1 to 2 yards, maybe difference, maybe not even 2 yards on the throw. It's a hard throw, but it's a throw we've seen them complete. You complete that Sunday, things can look a lot different. On that same drive, you have a 3rd and 7 to Zach Ertz. And on the play, you see, Ertz cuts out, Daniels throws over the top. I know on the broadcast, Greg Olson was like, "Oh, he was expecting this," and there was on that play, that was part of the issue. Like Ertz cuts out, leaves it kind of flat. That's how he read the play. Daniels read it differently. It leads to an incompletion. Now, if they both read it the same, would it be a completion? I don't know. But the fact that they didn't read it the same way, well, that's doesn't happen very often. And those are two guys that communicate an awful lot. So if you get on that one this week, you see the same thing, you complete that pass. Now that drive looks a lot different because that drive resulted in a punt. You complete one of those two throws, which you've completed most of the year. That game could go. A lot of things could go differently, right? Dallas could have played that game too about the what ifs, but that drive is different. You get points on that drive most likely. maybe not the extra point, but you'd have gotten some points, maybe. But point is, it looks different. If you complete one of those game in this game, now things look a lot different. So I don't think it's a matter of like they're completely far off. Because if I'm a coach, I'm going to tell them you're not far off. You complete one of this, or this. You're in position to do this, or this. Get it done, execute. Now you go. And so I think so. That's why I say, could that happen this week? Absolutely. The other thing along those lines is of course, a lot's getting made about McLaurin and Terry McLaurin, where he lines up. And it's a ton on the left side. We know that, right? Well, I would just say, I would caution you against thinking that that's the biggest issue with this offense. It is not the issue with the offense. The issue that alignment was a bigger issue in the Philadelphia game, because that one that's a game where I felt like they needed to move him around a little bit more, or start him on the right, motion him to the left, get him into something, because they clearly were anticipating where he was going very, very often, and they bracketed him in the end zone a few times. He had linebackers drop into slant areas. They knew where he liked to go, seemingly, and when. And they did a really good job of being aware of where he was. And if you get in that situation again, you've got to move him around. Against Dallas, he had enough one-on-one situations. It didn't matter if you're right or left, you're in a good spot. So that's why it wasn't, and even he would tell you that wasn't the issue. It's the Philadelphia game where it was the issue. So if you get in that spot again, you've got to adjust. And I didn't think they did that for him there. And so, as a defensive player, of course, if you move guys around, it's a little bit harder to know where are they. Well, they typically are going to know, but you don't know on the particular play where is he going to be. So, but that's where the motion can come into play and can help him be less stagnant and maybe a little bit less predictable. But again, the issue last week wasn't about predictability. It was about just didn't connect until the one play late in the game. So, there were a couple times where anyways, regardless, not the big issue, but you do have to do better if it becomes an issue in the game. And you should know the difference, right? Coaches should know the difference. And again, in Philadelphia, it absolutely became an issue because they couldn't get on the ball, and it was due to Philadelphia's defense knowing where he's at, knowing what he's going to do, etc. But Dallas was not the same thing. There are, the one thing I will say too about this offense, I think Jaden Daniels has done a good job, continue to make pretty good decisions. Now, you can always going to make one or two where you say, okay, I don't like that. But even I know there was a pass down to Noah Brown that people say, oh, you got to get to McLaurin on the other side. Well, he was going against a backup cornerback, so it wasn't a bad matchup at all. Maybe it wasn't the best throw, but it wasn't a bad matchup. So, I think that the decision making, I think, is what you want to see remain consistent, and I do feel it has. So I think he's in a good spot there. Anyways, number 3, I think the leadership of this team is really, really good, and it's going to be really, really challenged in games like this or weeks like this. But I think it's in a really good spot, and it gives this team a chance to recover from a 3-game losing streak. Bobby Wagner spoke to the team this week, and I think this is one of the things that you don't get a lot of guys very often who can do that and pull it off. Like, there have been times in the past where guys like DJ Swearinger would talk to the team. Well, I got to tell you, man, I know fans loved. They thought it was whatever. The players didn't respond the way fans did to him, because they didn't respect it, because they know some certain like, for example, he would make mistakes on defense and then call out the coaches but he was the one in the wrong coverage. Guys don't respond well to that, but they respond well to guys like Bobby Wagner. You don't get a lot of guys like him, and I haven't seen a lot of guys like him in there. I haven't seen anybody in there who carries the same weight he does to get up there and speak the way he does, because of what he's done in the league, where he's going after his career, which is the Hall of Fame. And just so his words resonate. He did get up and talk to them, and I do think it matters. And in fact, here's what Terry McLaurin had to say about what Wagner talked to them about.
Both, I think, is what they say and is what they do. I think, Bobby has been on a lot of great teams, and he's been a leader on pretty much all of them. So when he speaks, everybody listens. And I just think, one of the main things he's been telling us over the last few days is just continue to keep our energy high and staying focused. Adversity is here, and you know what I mean. And the only way you get to the other side is you go through it, and there's no other way to cut around that. But just the things that we committed to at the beginning of the season, whether that was the pledge with our brotherhood, whether it's the things that we're talking about in meetings, the energy that we have at practice, that has to show up on Sunday. Um, because if not, we're kind of full of it. You know what I mean?
Now, the other thing that Wagner does is just the way he practices, and that stuff resonates too. So, uh, Nikki Javala asked Dan Quinn something about him on Friday about like what little things you see or something along those lines. But what it did is it revealed a good little anecdote from Quinn about how he's watching him in a practice drill the other day and how perfect the form was just from the way where his feet were to where he hit the tackling dummy, etc. And just like here's a guy that's got over more than 1,000 tackles in his career. And he's done that drill, as Quinn said, probably 10,000 times, tackled it 10,000 times. And it just like, but just at this stage in his career, how detailed he was in just what he was doing and how he just did it because you do it so often, you just do it right. But it's a good example for other people and how to approach and how to do things. That's also leadership too. Then I also think you have to look at Dan Quinn. Excuse me, before I get there, you also have Zach Ertz. Both, he's been through a lot of situations, just like Wagner, both of them having won Super Bowl titles, that matters to other guys. Like they not only did it on the field, they played for winning teams. They know what it looks like. They know what happens when you get here, what happens you get here. And a lot of time, we've talked a lot about this team, about the brotherhood and the closeness and all that. Well, if you really have that, you don't buckle under these situations. Now, there's some things like I felt like they had that like, and we talked about that in the summertime. I didn't know how it would factor this season because you just wondered about the roster. Did they have enough on the roster? Like I remember thinking it's too bad that they don't have more on the roster because they are super tight and that super tightness matters. But do I still ask the question, do they have enough on the roster to really make it work fully for the season and where could they go with it? Well, we're going to see this week because I think that's games like this, times like this is when you really see it. But I do think the roster, there are some roster limitations that are starting to flare up that will test that brotherhood. But I think they will remain very close because it's kind of who they are. But we're going to see. And then also, I think there's Dan Quinn. He's somebody who really embraces moments, right? So I even asked him today, on Friday, like, you know, you seem to embrace these challenges. Like when he first talked to us, he talked about like, this is, you don't want to be in these situations, but this is why you coach to help get out of these kind of situations. And I did ask him about embracing the moment. And he's like, it's, again, he doesn't like it, but it's why he loves coaching. And it's not about accepting where you're at. It's about accepting the challenge to where you need to go. And he's a very big believer in telling guys like, hey, you get to the other side. When you get to the other side, you're going to look back on this and realize it was because of this. Now, that other side, is it going to happen this year? Is it going to happen next year? I don't know. But that other side in his mind is there. And so that's what you focus on is that other side. He's very big on the mental skills coach. If you read my story on him a couple weeks ago, I think you realize that. And I'm going to get to that in a minute. But again, for him, it's always knowing about what's around the corner. He likes to go prove it, etc. And then the big thing is, and this is where the mental skill stuff comes into play, is what's the next step? So this is the problem. What's the next step? How do you attack it? How do you get out of that? How do you get out of this predicament or how do you deal with this predicament rather than worrying about like, oh my gosh, you're in a 3-game losing streak. This is horrible. It's like, okay, this is what's going on. This is how you attack it. This is the next step. So I think like, and as he said, you don't let anger overtake you. He's like, he even said it. He goes, I'm not a Pollyanna, even though he comes across as a very upbeat, positive guy. He's going to chew out guys. He's done that. He'll drop an F-bomb, but he said, you can't let your anger overtake you. And this, again, mental skills coach, that Russ Roush, whom he works with. I talked to Roush for a long time for that story on Quinn. And I know that is a big part of the process. Okay, you have this game. He brought up the example one time when Quinn was in Seattle, they're getting ready to play Drew Brees in New Orleans. Is like, like, oh my gosh, they could embarrass us. So rather than sitting there all week worrying about, oh my God, they could embarrass us, low, this is bad, whatever. It's like, okay, then make sure you do this, this, and this, and this in practice to make sure that doesn't happen. So like that was a big lesson for Quinn to learn. And it's something that he said, even embracing these moments, he said it's something he's had to learn because it's hard. It's a hard thing. And you can be swallowed up by the negativity or the toxicity of a losing streak. I've been around coaches who do that. They make excuses. I haven't heard that here with this group. So that I think that mental skill stuff, and this is something they again they work with this with Russ Roush every Tuesday night, 10 minutes. They work with him. A lot of it is on breathing, then he'll give some messages, but it's just to remind you to again, a lot of it for him is what's the next step? So that's where that helps. So this is all that leadership. So if they get out of this, it's going to be because of leadership moments like that that can get you out of it. If not, well, then there's a lot more work to be done with that roster. Anyway, number 4. I think this is a very important game. Duh. But let me, I think we all know why, right? You can't afford to have a 4-game losing streak going into the bye with 2 of those losses at home against sub 500 teams. Like these are the exact teams that they've been beating all year. Now, I think Tennessee is better than, more competitive than a 3-8 record would suggest. But still, like you cannot go into the break at 7-6 when you were 7-2 and things were looking really good, because really what's going to happen in this town, we all know that it's going to look like, hey, all right, all these changes, all this stuff new, all this and all that. Well, now this is what was going on a couple years ago. The difference is you have Jaden Daniels now and you didn't then. So you have the main building block there. You have other places, other aspects in place in the organization that are like for the long term. And I always said long term, really, really good. Short term, don't know. And I think we're in that don't know. But the other reason is just looking at the playoffs. So, and I know, like, I don't know that everybody always likes when you talk about playoffs, but here's the reality, folks. Right now, that's what they're in. They're in a playoff race. This is what they're not sitting there talking about the playoffs. You got to win a game, but they are in the playoff hunt because they're 7-5. And but here's the tough part that you're going to get 3 teams out of the NFC North with Green Bay, Detroit, and Minnesota, who are all in great position to make the playoffs, barring some sort of collapse from any of them. The NFC West, NFC South, I think you're looking at probably one team. The South, though, is interesting because this is where Tampa Bay comes into play. Their schedule, and this is why this game is important. So that's why I'm getting into all this. Tampa Bay's schedule, and the reason I bring it up, Tampa schedule, is because they're 5-6. They could go 10-7 easily. I don't know because you have to go 5-1 to get there. But they have Carolina twice, the Raiders once, New Orleans, Dallas, and then the LA Chargers. So is that a 5-1 type schedule? If you're playing well, it can be, yeah. But are they playing well enough to get there? To do that, I don't know. And can this team get to 10 wins at this point? I don't know. I mean, the schedule still sets up like you could based on the opponents, but to me, you've got to be playing well. And that's why I think this is a very important game because you've got to get back to playing well, playing efficiently on offense, and just starting to feel better about yourself because otherwise, in December is going to be a tough one if you don't get back there. Now, I will say, having said all that, like you go down to New Orleans in 2 weeks and you win there. Well, the New Orleans game, if you're going to win one of those, if you're going to go 1-1 of these games, you want to beat New Orleans because it's an NFC game. It's a bigger tiebreaker game. Ideally, you win both. And I think this team needs to get back on that in that situation. But I really think at home, you don't want to go into the bye on a 4-game losing streak because now things start to other doubt really, really creeps in that point. So that's why I think this is so important. But again, I think it's kind of a duh situation because you've on a 3-game losing streak. Of course it's important. But I do think from the playoff perspective, when I'm looking at Tampa Bay, like they're in a sneaky spot. Like because they beat this team. If you go 10-7 and tie with them, well, now you're not in the playoffs. But again, I think probably a little bit too much about the playoff talks because when you have 3-game losing streak, the whole first goal is to play well, and that's why I think this is so important. Not necessarily about the playoffs, but just getting back to playing well. And it's funny because I've said this in years past, the last couple of years. Oh, they just need to go out and play well. They just, you play well against Tennessee, you've got to win. So, anyways, and it's funny because we talk about like measuring stick games early in the season. Every game's a measuring stick. This one is a huge measuring stick because, again, at home, sub 500 and 3-game losing streak, you have to win. And I said this last week, but you really have to win this week because, you don't want to go to the bye on the alternative. So there you go. And number 5, I think Tennessee is a confusing team because they're a little bit better than what their record shows at 3-8. Their defense certainly is a really weird mix of stats because they're ranked in the top 10 in a lot of areas. Their top defense on third down. This team has not done well on third down lately, so that's going to be absolutely something to watch. They have Tennessee is 6th in yards per carry. ninth in yards, rushing yards per carry, ninth in rushing yards per game. But they're like they're a bad scoring defense. They're 25th in the red zone. So I can't remember. I'm trying to find their bottom 5 or 6 team in scoring defense. So it's really kind of confusing. Now, some of that goes back to bad special teams. Their special teams gives up a lot of returns, and this is where Eckler's absence can hurt you because he's obviously very good in that area. Tennessee allows 37 and a half yards per kick return and 16.1 yards per punt return. Now, the last 3 games, they've been better on punt returns. The kick returns, then you have 21 turnovers on offense. That's why the Titans do not fare well in their scoring defense because they're consistently put in bad situations, in the sudden change situations, and that does not help. Um, so I think that's going to be something to watch how they handle all that. But Tennessee does have some talent in that defense. There's a lot when you watch the defense, it's pretty solid. And they starts up front with Jason Simmons and then rookie Tavondre Sweat. Big dudes up front, man. It's going to be really, really hard to run against them. And that's why even though Brian Robinson will be playing, with I think losing Andrew Wiley hurts. Trent Scott is just not the run blocker that Wiley is. It's not like Wiley is some beast out there as a run blocker, but he's better. And so I'd be curious to see how that impacts. But those guys in the interior, that's going to be the key. And I think like Allegretti's going to have his hands full, and so is Biotish. But Allegretti is a smaller guy compared to Biotish, and then and Sam Cosmi. But those guys have to have a really good game because that's where Tennessee is going to hurt them for sure. And um, Arden Key, Harold Landry, they have some other good parts there. And in the secondary, they have um, in the secondary they have some pretty good players there too. Mhm. For example, rookie corner Jarvis Brownlee played a ton of snaps, has a really good year, has had guys like Justin Jefferson have told him or relayed messages to him about how well he's played against them. So that's going to be somebody to watch, especially for Washington. But really, like I said, it starts up front with Simmons and Sweat, and they're the ones that makes things happen. And just some big, strong guys for sure. And they will line up Simmons all over the place on that line. In fact, one time I saw him lining up in a stand-up rush position over the right guard and just barreled the hell out of him through to the quarterback. So he can do things for sure. Now, how can you hurt them? Well, again, if you can't run, I do think you can hurt them in the pass game, right? And so, like, it's not some of the time it's funny because the yards they do really well in the yards, but part of that is because drives are starting so much in their territory. Teams haven't had to go far. I do think it's important for this team to get some chunk plays. They finally got some late in the game against Dallas. I don't Can they build on that? We'll see. But they need to get more of those chunk plays because it's really, really hard to live in this league on a 10, 15 play drive all the time. And that's kind of what they've been residing in. And that's why those big plays early to McLaurin, if you can get those on some of those one-on-one situations, would be very huge. Now, the other thing is with Daniels scrambling. So one of the guys that hurt Tennessee with the scrambles is Drake May. So in part, he had 5 scrambles against the Titans, 26 yards, 13 yards, 22 yards, 13 yards, 11 yards. So sometimes it was simply because, like, yes, you're going to get maybe some interior pressure, but maybe the ends aren't pinching as much as in some other teams that Washington's face. It leaves some gaps in escape lanes, and that's where may hurt them. I think that they do the same thing against Daniels. He can hurt them with the legs too. So I think between that, the return games, and then the turnovers, forcing a turnover offense. I'll get to that in a minute. But I think that's where you can really change the field. You need to give this offense some short fields. And I say that though, but they botched 3 of them against Dallas last week in the first half, and it's why they lost. Because it wasn't about the extra point, it's about botching good field position early. You can't have that happen again. You've got to capitalize way better than you did last week. But again, starts with stopping those 2 guys up front, and in the escape lanes for Daniels, because there were a couple times when you're watching it with guys being able to get outside that against like Dallas or Philly or even Pittsburgh, all those teams were able to pinch the tackles way too much, and the interior penetration prevented Daniels from really finding those escape lanes that I think he might be able to get against Tennessee. And then offensively, the Titans, they're 26 in scoring, they're 24th in yards. It's not a very good offense, but they're starting to make some noise lately. And it's Calvin Ridley, the receiver, has done a really good job of late. I'm going to give you his stats. Last 5 games, 29 catches, 451 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He's a big playmaker. You've got to stop him. He's a fast guy. He's got some. I think he's a guy that, listen, Mike Samuel's gone up against some good receivers this year. I think he can be in a good spot here if that's what they decide. If that's who they decide to put on him. Love the competitor that he is, and so do the coaches. And a lot of it's getting made about, is this his future? Is he going to be outside in the future? Listen, all you have to do right now is coach him to where he's at right now. And right now, you need him outside. That's where he belongs. When next year, if you get another guy in here who can play outside, another big guy, you can put him inside. Now you're in really good shape. But right now, for this group, you need him outside. So whenever Lattimore comes in, and I know when Lattimore was here, I was kind of, pretty not strong, but like I thought they would put him back inside and go St. Juice. But it could still possibly be that if you go to a 3 corner set, that you have Sam still inside, Lattimore and St. Juice and or Davis or someone else outside. So that's for down the road, not here yet. Right now, you got Sam still, who's doing really well. He's again competitive as hell, and that's why he's able to do what he does. And he's just really smart. And I think, I even asked, we were talking to the defense backs coach, Tom Donatel today. And we were asking him about just like where does he really show that competitive? Just like every time, every down, every time in meetings, in practice, in the practice field. So that's just who he is. But it's why he can handle a situation like this. But you got to prevent the big play because Levis will take shots. Will Levis will take shots. He's a guy that's like, they also have Tony Pollard, the running back. We know what he can do. We saw him in Dallas. So did these guys. They know him pretty well. But with Levis, he's kind of stuck between the gunslinger and trying to be cautious. He's 9 interceptions this year. He gets sacked a ton because he is looking for big plays. He will hold the ball. I think in the last 3 games, he's been sacked 20 times combined. So that's bad. And there are a good chunk of those would be on him because of the way he holds the ball. You can also get him to throw under duress. There are some sacks he avoided because he just chucked the ball up. And you see that a lot. Sometimes you're chucking it up and it's the fourth quarter late. You're down 3 scores and it's late. That happened. But he does that in other parts of the game too. So he'll throw off his back foot, he'll throw into double coverage. He won't see guys. He will predetermine reads. So to me, one thing you do is show him the read, right? Give him a read, rotate after, and get a little bit of pressure on him. And I think you can cause some mistakes. Will it be enough to beat them? We'll see. But you can listen. They're 3-8 for a reason. They have 21 turnovers. They're -12 in turnover margin. That's why they're 3-8. You create that situation for them, and you'll win. And that's what Washington has to do. But he will throw off his back foot. He will make those mistakes. He will force the ball downfield. In some ways, he's a little bit like a Rex Grossman, where Rex was always kind of caught between being a gunslinger and then also just playing smart, but he liked to sling it. When you have that gunslinger mentality, it's hard not to gunsling eventually. Um, and then you also have receiver Nate Westbrook, who's been very good of late, 6 touchdowns his last 6 games. Another guy to watch. I watched some of the big plays that he made, and sometimes just bad safety play. But we've seen that here too. We've seen bad secondary play here too. So it's not like they're immune from that to that. They are not. So, but I think he's just another guy to watch. And it's not a special offense here. Like this defense should be okay, but you've got to get help from the offense. That to me is the big thing. And how much can you pressure Levis into making some mistakes, flipping the field, putting yourself in a good spot to do that. And the other thing is like they've had some right issues at right tackle this year. So that's another area to watch as well. So listen, man, this team needs a win. I don't even know what after going into last week, I was pretty confident they beat the Cowboys. It just unfolded in a weird way when they didn't get stuff done early. You kind of had to feel like this might not be a good day. So to me, come out strong, get it back, get McLaurin involved. Like I do think, even though what I said earlier, that it's not all about where he lines up, I think you've got to get him the ball. And one thing I appreciate with Jaden is like he'll say, hey, he's going to go where the defense takes him. That's good. But I do think you want, as a coordinator, to manufacture some situations to put McLaurin in a good spot to get going early. So, it doesn't have to be 5, 6, 7 targets early. Get him involved early. Get some big plays early. And again, the one to Dallas last week, that was a shot. If you complete that, he was in position to make the play. It just wasn't complete. The play was called. It was there. Just it wasn't completed. But you can get a situation like that, take advantage again. So you do that, I think you'll be okay. If not, it's going to hang around to the end, and weird stuff happens in the end. So Washington needs a win. Got to get back to that place, or it's going to be a long bye week. So anyway, that's it from me, folks. Appreciate you tuning in, and look forward to talking to you after the game, wrapping up the Commanders and Titans, and we'll talk to you next time.